She sat alone at the wedding until the millionaire whispered, "Be mine for just one night." Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She shouldn't have come to this wedding, but here she was, drowning in champagne bubbles and other people's happiness. Isabella Moore adjusted the simple black dress that suddenly felt too plain among the sea of designer gowns swirling around the Manhattan ballroom. At 26, she had grown accustomed to being the observer rather than the observed, but tonight felt different, heavier somehow, as if the universe was holding its breath. The Grand Meridian Hotel sparkled like a jewel box, its crystal chandeliers casting golden reflections on marble floors that probably cost more than Isabella's annual salary as a social worker. She traced the rim of her untouched champagne glass, watching couples glide across the dance floor in perfect synchronization, their laughter floating above the string quartet's melodies. "How you look like you'd rather be anywhere else," her friend Cassidy had said earlier, practically dragging her through the gilded entrance. "It's time you lived a little, Bella. Stop hiding behind your work and those romance novels." Now Cassidy was nowhere to be found, probably charming some investment banker by the chocolate fountain, and Isabella sat alone at table 12, the designated spot for +1s who don't quite belong. She should leave, call an Uber, slip out quietly, and be back in her modest Brooklyn apartment before midnight, where she could curl up with her grandmother Eleanor's hand-knitted blanket and a cup of tea. But something kept her glued to her chair. Maybe it was the way the bride's eyes sparkled when she looked at her new husband, or how the elderly couple at table 3 still held hands during dinner, despite their wrinkled fingers and wedding rings worn smooth by decades. Isabella found herself wondering if that kind of love, the real lasting kind, was just a beautiful myth, like unicorns or politicians who kept their promises. Her grandmother Eleanor would have laughed at such cynicism. "Child," she would say in that warm, honey-thick voice, "love isn't a fairy tale. It's a choice you make every single day, through tears and laughter, through storms and sunshine." Isabella smiled softly, remembering those Sunday afternoons in Eleanor's small kitchen, flour dusting their hands as they baked together, the older woman sharing wisdom disguised as casual conversation. Eleanor had raised her after her parents' car accident, teaching her that dignity wasn't about how much money you had, but how you carried yourself through life's unexpected moments. The music shifted to something slower, more intimate, and Isabella's attention drifted across the ballroom. That's when she saw him. Adrian Schofield stood near the bar, his tall frame commanding attention even in a room full of Manhattan's elite. Isabella recognized him from magazine covers and business articles, the hotel mogul who had built an empire before his 40th birthday, known as much for his ruthless business acumen as for his complete disinterest in settling down. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored tuxedo fitting him like it was crafted by angels, and his steel-gray eyes surveyed the room with the cool detachment of someone who owned half of it. Which, Isabella realized, he probably did. She watched as several women approached him throughout the evening, each one more stunning than the last, their designer gowns and practiced smiles weapons in a battle she couldn't even comprehend. But Adrian barely acknowledged them, his responses polite but distant, his attention already moving elsewhere before they finished speaking. Isabella looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. She didn't belong in his world of private jets and penthouse apartments, of charity galas that raised more money in one evening than she'd see in a lifetime. She was just a girl from Harlem who helped troubled teenagers find their way, who clipped coupons and shopped at thrift stores, who measured wealth in good books and warm hugs from her grandmother. But when she glanced up again, those steel-grey eyes were looking directly at her. Time seemed to pause, the laughter and music fading into white noise as Adrian's gaze held hers across the crowded ballroom. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. She should look away, pretend she hadn't been watching him, but something in his expression, a flicker of genuine curiosity perhaps, kept her frozen in place. Then Adrian began walking toward her, each step deliberate and confident, and Isabella realized with a mixture of terror and anticipation that her quiet evening of observation was about to become something else entirely. And in that moment, she had no idea that the man approaching her table was about to whisper words that would change everything she thought she knew about love, about herself, and about the possibility of fairy tales coming true in the most unexpected ways. Do you think Isabella should trust those steel-grey eyes walking toward her, or is she about to make the biggest mistake of her life? The most dangerous men are the ones who walk toward you like they already know your answer. Adrian Schofield moved through the crowd with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to parting seas of people, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Isabella's fingers tightened around her champagne glass as she watched him navigate between dancing couples and chattering groups, his eyes never leaving hers. "Run," her rational mind screamed. "This is exactly the kind of complication Eleanor warned you about." But her body betrayed her. Rooted to the velvet chair as if gravity itself had shifted, she could feel the curious glances of nearby guests, the subtle whispers that followed in Adrian's wake. The woman at table 11 leaned forward, her diamond earrings catching the light as she murmured something to her companion about Schofield choosing his next conquest. The words stung more than they should have. "Mind if I sit?" Adrian's voice was deeper than she'd expected, with a slight rasp that suggested late nights and important decisions. He gestured to the empty chair beside her, though they both knew he wasn't really asking permission. "It's a free country," Isabella replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. "Though I should warn you, this table seems to be where they put the people who don't quite fit the dress code." A ghost of a smile touched his lips as he settled into the chair, and Isabella caught a hint of his cologne, something expensive and understated, like cedar and rain. "Maybe that's exactly where I belong tonight." The answer surprised her. She'd expected arrogance, the casual dismissal of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Instead, there was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, as if he were testing the words on his tongue. "Isabella Moore," she said, extending her hand with more confidence than she felt. "And before you ask, no, I'm not someone's +1 who got lucky. I'm Cassidy Hampton's friend from the real world, Adrian Schofield." His handshake was firm but brief, his calloused fingers a surprise against her soft palm. "And the real world is exactly what I've been missing." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the bride and groom share their first dance as husband and wife. The bride's dress sparkled like captured starlight, and her new husband looked at her as if she'd hung the moon personally. Isabella found herself smiling at their obvious joy. "Do you believe in that?" Adrian asked quietly, following her gaze. "In what? Marriage? In forever?" The word hung between them like a challenge. In the idea that two people can promise to love each other through everything life throws at them and actually mean it. Isabella studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw, the way his fingers drummed silently against the tablecloth. "You sound like someone who's given it considerable thought." "I'm 37 years old," he said, still watching the dancers. "I've built hotels on 3 continents, employed thousands of people, and made decisions that affect millions of dollars daily. But I've never once made a promise I wasn't absolutely certain I could keep." "That sounds lonely." It sounds practical, but there was something hollow in his voice, as if he were reciting a lesson he'd learned by heart but never quite believed. Isabella set down her champagne glass and turned to face him fully. "My grandmother Eleanor raised me after my parents died. She was married to my grandfather for 42 years before cancer took him. I used to ask her how she knew he was the one, and you know what she told me." Adrian's eyes met hers, and she was struck by how intently he listened, as if her words might contain some secret he'd been searching for. "She said she didn't know, not at first, but every day she made the choice to love him, and every day he made the same choice back. The forever part wasn't a promise they made once, it was a promise they kept making." "And you believe that's possible? That kind of a daily devotion?" "I believe in the possibility of it," Isabella said carefully, "though I've never experienced it myself." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a crack in the carefully maintained composure. "Would you dance with me?" The question caught her off guard. Around them, the reception continued its elegant rhythm, but suddenly it felt as if they were suspended in their own private bubble. Isabella glanced down at her simple black dress, then at the designer gowns swirling past them. "I don't really belong out there," she admitted. "Neither do I," Adrian said, standing and offering his hand. "Tonight, anyway." Against every instinct screaming at her to be cautious, Isabella placed her hand in his. His fingers were warm and steady, and when he led her onto the dance floor, she felt something inside her chest flutter to life, something she'd kept carefully locked away since her last relationship ended in disappointment and empty promises. The music was soft and romantic, something classical that made the chandeliers seem to sway in time. Adrian's hand settled at the small of her back, respectful but firm, and Isabella found herself relaxing into the rhythm despite her nerves. "You're a good dancer," she murmured, surprised. "Boarding school," he said with a self-deprecating smile. Along with table manners and the proper way to tie a bow tie, not exactly useful skills for most people's daily lives, but useful for nights like this. Nights like this don't usually matter to me. The honesty in his voice made Isabella look up, and she found herself drowning in those steel-grey eyes. There was something there, a hunger that wasn't quite desire, wasn't quite loneliness, but something deeper and more complex. They moved together in perfect synchronization, as if they'd been dancing together for years instead of minutes. Other couples swirled around them, but Isabella barely noticed. All she could focus on was the way Adrian looked at her, as if she were the only person in the room, the only person who mattered. When the song began to fade, Adrian didn't immediately step away. Instead, he leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, and then he whispered the words that would change everything. "Be mine, for just one night." Some words hit you like lightning, sudden, brilliant, and utterly destructive. Isabella froze in Adrian's arms, her body going rigid as his whispered request echoed in her mind. The ballroom continued to spin around them, couples laughing, champagne glasses clinking, the string quartet playing their romantic melody. But for Isabella, everything had stopped. "Be mine for just one night." She pulled back sharply, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of shock and something that might have been hurt. The space between them suddenly felt like an ocean, cold and vast and impossible to cross. "Excuse me?" Her voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of thunder. Adrian's expression shifted instantly, the confident mask slipping as he realized his words had landed like a slap rather than an invitation. "Isabella, No." She stepped back, her heels clicking against the marble floor with finality. "Just no." Without another word, she turned and walked away, weaving through the dancing couples with the desperate urgency of someone fleeing a fire. Her chest felt tight, her breathing shallow, and she could feel the familiar sting of tears threatening to spill over. How could I have been so stupid? She pushed through the ballroom's ornate doors and found herself in the hotel's grand lobby, all gleaming marble and fresh orchids. A few guests milled about, their laughter echoing off the high ceilings, but Isabella barely saw them. She needed air, needed space, needed to put as much distance as possible between herself and Adrian Schofield's casual proposition. Her hand shook as she fumbled for her phone, scrolling through her contacts until she found Cassidy's number. But before she could call, a warm hand touched her shoulder. "Isabella, please, let me explain." She spun around to find Adrian standing there, his perfectly styled hair slightly mussed, his bow tie askew. For the first time all evening, he looked less like a magazine cover and more like a man who just made a terrible mistake. "Explain what?" Isabella's voice cracked with emotion. "That you saw me sitting alone and thought I'd be an easy target? That you assumed because I don't wear designer clothes or move in your circles, I'd be grateful for whatever attention you decided to throw my way? That's not—" Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his composure completely shattered. "God, no, that's not what I meant at all." "Then what did you mean?" Isabella crossed her arms over her chest, a protective barrier against the hurt blooming in her ribcage. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounded like you were offering to rent me for the evening." The words hit their target. Adrian flinched as if she'd physically struck him, his face going pale. "You're right," he said quietly. "That's exactly how it sounded, and I'm sorry. More sorry than you could possibly know." Isabella studied his face, searching for any sign of the smooth manipulation she'd expected. Instead, she found something raw and honest, regret etched in every line of his features. "I don't understand you," she said, her voice softer now, but still guarded. "One minute you're talking about forever being impossible, the next you're asking me to be yours for a night. What am I supposed to think?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes fixed on the marble floor between them. When he finally looked up, there was something vulnerable in his expression that made Isabella's breath catch. "I've never asked anyone for forever," he said slowly. "Not once in 37 years, because I've never believed I deserved it." The admission hung between them like a bridge, fragile, tentative, but real. "So you ask for one night instead?" "It's all I've ever thought I was worth." His voice was barely audible. "One night with someone beautiful and genuine and real, and then back to my empty penthouse and my empty life. At least that way, I can't disappoint anyone when I inevitably mess it up." Isabella felt her anger begin to crack, revealing the hurt underneath. "And what about me? What about what I might be worth?" "You're worth everything," Adrian said without hesitation. "That's what terrifies me." The honesty in his voice nearly undid her. Isabella could feel herself softening despite every instinct telling her to run. This was dangerous territory, the kind of emotional quicksand that swallowed women whole and left them broken and bitter. "I should go," she whispered, but she didn't move. "You should," Adrian agreed, but he didn't step away either. They stood there in the hotel lobby, two people from different worlds, surrounded by the soft murmur of other people's conversations and the distant sound of music from the ballroom. Isabella could feel the pull between them, magnetic and undeniable, but she could also hear Eleanor's voice in her mind, gentle but firm. "The love, my dear, is not measured by beautiful words, but by actions. My grandmother always told me," Isabella said slowly, "that when someone shows you who they are, you should believe them the first time." Adrian's jaw tightened. "And what do you think I've shown you?" Isabella looked at him, really looked at him, beyond the expensive suit and the reputation and the walls he'd built around himself. What she saw was a man who'd been taught to expect less because he'd been told he deserved less. A man who asked for one night because he'd never learned to hope for more. "I think," she said carefully, "you've shown me someone who's afraid." The words hit their mark. Adrian's mask slipped completely, and for a moment Isabella saw him as he truly was. Not the ruthless businessman or the untouchable millionaire, but a man who'd convinced himself that temporary was safer than forever. "I should be afraid of you," she added quietly. "Why aren't you?" Isabella considered the question, her heart hammering against her ribs. The smart answer was that she was afraid. The safe answer was that she should run back to Brooklyn and forget this night ever happened. But looking into Adrian's eyes, seeing the genuine regret and something that might have been hope, Isabella found herself giving a different answer entirely. "Because I don't think you really want just one night either. The truth has a way of arriving uninvited, like lightning splitting open a summer sky." Adrian's breath caught at Isabella's words, and for a moment, the sophisticated lobby of the Grand Meridian might as well have been the edge of a cliff. Her statement hung between them. "Because I don't think you really want just one night either," challenging everything he'd built his life around. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Don't I?" Isabella stepped closer, her dark eyes searching his face with an intensity that made him feel exposed. "Because the man who spent the last hour talking about forever and daily devotion doesn't sound like someone who settles for temporary." Adrian felt something crack inside his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd worn for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe without it. "Isabella, tell me I'm wrong." Her voice was soft but relentless. "Tell me that when you were watching me from across that ballroom, you were thinking about one night. Tell me that's all you want." He opened his mouth to lie, to give her the easy answer that would send her running back to her safe, uncomplicated life. But looking into her eyes, those deep, knowing eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul, the words wouldn't come. "I can't," he whispered. The admission seemed to echo in the space between them, louder than the distant music, louder than the murmur of other guests. Isabella's expression softened, and Adrian saw something there that terrified him more than any boardroom negotiation or hostile takeover: compassion. "Why?" she asked gently. "Why can't you ask for what you really want?" Adrian turned away, unable to bear the kindness in her gaze. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see the Manhattan skyline glittering like scattered diamonds, a view he'd conquered and claimed, but that had never made him feel less alone. "Because I've never been worth more than that," he said finally. "My father made sure I understood that from the time I was old enough to disappoint him." Isabella's sharp intake of breath made him look back at her. "What do you mean?" "Theodore Schofield didn't believe in participation trophies," Adrian said with a bitter smile. "Second place was first loser. B+ meant I wasn't trying hard enough. And emotions?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emotions were weaknesses to be eliminated. Adrian, I built my first hotel at 25, he continued, the words pouring out like water through a broken dam. Made my first million before I turned 30. Do you know what my father said when I called to tell him?" Isabella shook her head, her heart breaking for the man standing before her. No longer the untouchable millionaire, but someone who'd been wounded so deeply, he'd forgotten how to heal. He said, "Call me when you've made 10 million. Then maybe we'll have something to discuss." Adrian's voice was steady, but Isabella could see the pain flickering in his eyes. He died 2 years later. Heart attack in his office. We never had that conversation. "I'm sorry," Isabella whispered, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. "So you see," Adrian said, straightening his shoulders as if trying to rebuild his defenses, I learned early that nothing I do is ever enough, that I'm not enough. One night is all I've ever asked for because it's all I've ever believed I deserved. Isabella felt tears sting her eyes. She thought of Eleanor, who had spent 42 years choosing love every single day, who had raised Isabella with gentle hands and infinite patience. The contrast was heartbreaking. "That's not love," she said firmly. "What your father gave you, that wasn't love. That was cruelty disguised as high standards." "Maybe," Adrian said, "but it's the only blueprint I have. Then we'll build you a new one." The words slipped out before Isabella could stop them, and they both froze. She hadn't meant to say we, hadn't meant to imply a future, a togetherness, a possibility that extended beyond this moment in a hotel lobby. But looking at Adrian's face, the surprise, the hope, the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide, she realized she meant every word. "Isabella," he said carefully, as if her name were made of glass, "you don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying." She took a breath, thinking of Eleanor's wisdom about daily choices and promises kept. "I'm saying that maybe it's time someone showed you that you're worth more than one night, worth more than conditional love, worth more than you've ever let yourself believe." Adrian stared at her as if she'd just offered him the moon. "And you think you're the person to do that?" "I think," Isabella said, her heart hammering so hard she was sure he could hear it, "that we could find out together." The silence stretched between them, filled with possibility and terror in equal measure. Around them, the hotel continued its elegant nighttime rhythm, guests chatting, elevators chiming, the distant sound of the wedding reception still going strong. But for Isabella and Adrian, the world had narrowed to just this moment, this choice, this leap of faith. "What are you asking me?" Adrian's voice was rough with emotion. Isabella stepped closer, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, close enough to smell his cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "I'm asking you to be brave," she said softly. "I'm asking you to want more. And if I can't give you more, if I disappoint you the way I've disappointed everyone else, then we'll figure it out as we go." Isabella reached out, her fingers brushing against his. "But Adrian, you have to want to try. Not for me, not for anyone else." "For you?" Adrian looked down at their joined hands, and Isabella could practically see the war raging inside him, the lifetime of conditioning that told him he wasn't worth the risk, battling against something newer and more fragile: hope. When he looked up, his eyes held a question that made Isabella's breath catch. "What if I told you," he said slowly, "that I've been waiting my entire life for someone to say those words to me? Sometimes the most beautiful things are born from the wreckage of what we thought we deserved." Isabella felt her heart stop and restart at Adrian's confession. The raw honesty in his voice, the way he looked at her as if she might disappear at any moment, it was overwhelming and beautiful and terrifying all at once. "Then maybe," she whispered, "it's time to stop waiting." The words hung between them like a bridge, fragile but real. Adrian's fingers tightened around hers, and Isabella could feel the tremor in his hands, this powerful man who commanded boardrooms and built empires, shaking because someone had offered him hope. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "I don't know how to be what more." "Neither do I," Isabella said with a soft laugh that was half tears. "I've spent so long protecting myself from men who wanted less that I never learned what to do with someone who might want more." They stood there in the hotel lobby, two broken people finding something whole in each other's honesty. The wedding reception continued behind the ballroom doors, but their world had narrowed to this moment, this choice, this leap of faith neither had expected to take. "We could start with coffee," Isabella suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. "Coffee?" Adrian's eyebrows rose, and she caught a glimpse of the man he might have been if his father had chosen love over conditional approval. "Tomorrow morning, somewhere normal, somewhere that doesn't cost more than my monthly rent." Isabella smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Just two people getting to know each other without champagne and crystal chandeliers. "I know a place," Adrian said slowly, as if testing the words. "There's this little cafe in Brooklyn. Delaney's Corner. The owner, Marta, makes the best blueberry muffins I've ever tasted." Isabella blinked in surprise. "You know a place in Brooklyn?" A flush crept up Adrian's neck. Sometimes I drive around the city when I can't sleep, just to see how real people live. Marta doesn't know who I am. She calls me honey and argues with me about whether I need more than black coffee for breakfast." The image of Adrian Schofield being fussed over by a maternal cafe owner was so endearing that Isabella felt something crack open inside her chest. "She sounds wonderful," She reminds me of what I imagine a mother should be like, Adrian said quietly. Warm, accepting, someone who loves you not because of what you achieve, but because of who you are. Isabella thought of Eleanor, of Sunday mornings spent baking and laughing and sharing stories. My grandmother would have loved her. Eleanor always said the best people are the ones who feed your soul along with your stomach. I'd like to hear more about Eleanor, Adrian said, about the woman who raised someone like you, someone like me, someone brave enough to see past the armor to the man underneath, someone generous enough to offer hope to a stranger. Adrian's voice was soft with wonder. Someone who makes me want to be better than I've ever been. Isabella felt tears prick her eyes. Adrian, is 9 o'clock too early? He asked suddenly. For coffee, I mean. I know you probably have to work. I have Saturdays off, Isabella interrupted, her heart racing at the realization that they were actually planning this. 9 o'clock sounds perfect. They exchanged numbers, their fingers brushing as Adrian handed her phone back to her. The simple touch sent electricity through Isabella's entire body, and from the way Adrian's breath caught, she knew he felt it too. I should probably rescue Cassidy from whatever investment banker she's charmed, Isabella said reluctantly. And you should probably return to your reception before people start wondering where the mysterious hotel mogul disappeared to. Probably, Adrian agreed, but neither of them moved. The moment stretched between them, full of possibility and promise. Isabella could see herself reflected in Adrian's grey eyes, and for the first time in years, she liked what she saw. A woman brave enough to take a chance, strong enough to offer healing, wise enough to see potential where others saw only walls. Isabella, Adrian said softly. Thank you. For what? For seeing me, he said simply. Really seeing me. Isabella reached up and touched his cheek gently, feeling the slight roughness of stubble, the warmth of his skin. Thank you for letting me. They stood there for one more heartbeat, memorizing each other's faces, before reality began to creep back in. Isabella could hear the wedding reception winding down, the music softer now, the laughter more subdued. I should go, she said, but her hand lingered on his cheek. So should I, Adrian replied, but he leaned into her touch. Finally, with more willpower than she knew she possessed, Isabella stepped back. 9 o'clock, she said firmly. 9 o'clock, Adrian confirmed. Isabella turned and walked toward the ballroom, her heart hammering with excitement and terror in equal measure. At the doorway, she looked back to find Adrian still watching her, his expression soft with something that might have been wonder. She was halfway across the ballroom, searching for Cassidy among the remaining guests, when her phone buzzed with a text message. I already can't wait until morning. Isabella smiled, typing back quickly. Good. That means you're already learning to want more. His response came immediately, and when Isabella read it, she felt her breath catch in her throat. With you, I'm beginning to think I might want everything. The morning after you decide to change your life always feels different, as if the very air holds promises it never made before. Isabella stood in front of her bedroom mirror at 8:15, trying on her third outfit, and wondering if she'd lost her mind completely. The black sundress made her look too formal. The jeans and sweater made her look like she was trying too hard to be casual. The floral dress... Oh, for heaven's sake, she muttered, sinking onto her bed in her grandmother's old Brooklyn apartment. The morning light streaming through the windows seemed to mock her indecision. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand, and Isabella's heart jumped. Good morning. I know it's early, but I wanted you to know I'm already thinking about you. Isabella smiled despite her nerves. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying every moment of the night before. Adrian's vulnerability, his confession, the way he'd looked at her as if she might be the answer to questions he'd never dared ask. Good morning to you too. I'm nervous. Is that normal? His response came quickly. If you're not nervous, you're not paying attention. I've been awake since 5. Couldn't sleep either. Didn't want to. I kept thinking about what you said, about building a new blueprint. I've never wanted anything as much as I want to get this right. Isabella felt her chest tighten with emotion. She typed back, We'll figure it out together, remember? Together. I like the sound of that. Isabella finally settled on the jeans and a soft cream sweater, comfortable but pretty, approachable but put together. As she applied a light coat of mascara, she caught sight of Eleanor's old jewelry box on the dresser and felt a pang of longing. What would you think of him, Grandma? She whispered to the empty room. Would you tell me to run, or would you see what I see? As if in answer, Eleanor's voice echoed in her memory. The heart knows what it knows, baby girl. Trust it, but use your head too. At 8:50, Isabella stood outside Delaney's corner cafe, her hands trembling slightly as she checked her reflection in the window. The little cafe was exactly what she'd hoped for. Worn brick walls covered in local artwork, mismatched chairs around small wooden tables, the warm smell of coffee and baked goods drifting through the open door. Through the window, she spotted Adrian immediately. He sat at a corner table, looking nothing like the polished businessman from the night before. His dark hair was slightly tousled, he wore a simple navy sweater and jeans, and he was actually reading a newspaper, a real, physical newspaper, like a normal person. The sight of him looking so human made Isabella's heart flutter. When she pushed open the door, the little bell above it chimed and Adrian looked up. His face transformed when he saw her, his carefully neutral expression melting into something warm and genuine. "You came," he said, standing as she approached. "Did you think I wouldn't? I hoped you would, but I also know that in the light of day last night might have seemed like a beautiful dream that couldn't possibly be real." Isabella slipped into the seat across from him, noting how he'd chosen a table tucked away from the windows, private but not hidden. "What about you? Any second thoughts?" "1,000, Adrian admitted with a rueful smile, but not one of them involved not being here. Before Isabella could respond, a cheerful voice interrupted them. Well, look who finally brought a date to my cafe." Isabella turned to see a plump woman in her 60s approaching their table, her graying hair pulled back in a messy bun, her apron dusted with flour. Her warm brown eyes sparkled with curiosity and unmistakable affection as she looked at Adrian. "Marta," Adrian said, and Isabella could hear genuine fondness in his voice. "I'd like you to meet Isabella. Isabella, this is Marta Rodriguez, the heart and soul of this place. So you're the one who finally put a smile on this boy's face," Marta said, extending a flour-dusted hand to Isabella. "He's been coming here for 2 years, always alone, always looking like he carries the weight of the world on his shoulders." "Marta," Adrian protested, but he was smiling. "Don't you Marta me," the older woman scolded playfully. "I've been waiting for someone to make you order something besides black coffee and a plain bagel. Maybe now you'll try my blueberry muffins." Isabella laughed, instantly charmed. "He mentioned your muffins last night. He said they were the best he'd ever tasted." "Did he now?" Marta beamed. "Well, then you both get fresh ones straight from the oven. And Isabella, honey, you tell me if this one gives you any trouble. I've got a wooden spoon, and I'm not afraid to use it." As Marta bustled away, Isabella turned to Adrian with raised eyebrows. 2 years. I found this place during one of my insomniac drives," Adrian said, looking slightly embarrassed. "It was 3 in the morning. I was having a particularly bad night, and I saw the light on. Marta was here early preparing for the morning rush. She took one look at me and said I looked like I needed coffee and mothering in equal measure. And you kept coming back." She never asked who I was. "Never treated me like anything other than a regular customer who needed feeding." Adrian's voice was soft with affection. "Some mornings, she's the only person I talk to who sees me as just Adrian." Isabella felt her heart squeeze. "She loves you. The feeling is mutual." Adrian reached across the table and took Isabella's hand. "I've never brought anyone here before. This place is special to me." "I'm honored," Isabella said, and meant it. Marta returned with a tray laden with coffee, fresh blueberry muffins that smelled like heaven, and a knowing smile. "Now you two enjoy yourselves. And Isabella, honey, you make sure he eats every bite of that muffin. He's too skinny." As Marta walked away, Isabella and Adrian looked at each other and burst into laughter. "I can see why you love her," Isabella said, breaking off a piece of the warm muffin. "She's exactly what you need." "What we all need," Adrian corrected. "Someone who loves without conditions." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the morning sunlight streaming through the windows, the cafe gradually filling with the Saturday morning crowd. Isabella watched Adrian relax in a way she suspected few people ever saw, his shoulders losing their rigid posture, his face softening, his guard completely down. "This is nice," she said quietly. "Better than nice," Adrian replied. "This feels like something I could get used to." "Saturday morning coffee dates. Saturday morning coffee dates with you," he clarified, his grey eyes serious. "Isabella, about last night. No regrets?" she asked, suddenly needing to know. "None," Adrian said firmly. "But I need you to know something." Isabella's heart skipped. "What?" Adrian leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that made her pulse race. "I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting more, and I realized something that terrifies me. The most frightening moment in any love story is when you realize you have everything to lose. Isabella's breath caught at the intensity in Adrian's voice. Around them, the cafe continued its gentle Saturday morning rhythm, Marta humming behind the counter, the soft murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine, but Isabella felt as if they were suspended in their own private world. "What terrifies you?" she asked softly, her fingers tightening around her coffee cup. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes fixed on their joined hands on the small wooden table. When he finally looked up, Isabella saw something raw and vulnerable that made her chest ache. "I've spent my entire life building walls," he said slowly. "Around my heart, around my hopes, around any possibility of real connection. And in one night, you've made me want to tear them all down." "That's not terrifying," Isabella whispered. "That's beautiful." "It's terrifying," Adrian insisted, "because I don't know who I am without those walls. What if the man underneath isn't worth loving? What if I disappoint you the way I've disappointed everyone else?" Isabella studied his face, the sharp cheekbones, the perfectly sculpted jaw, the mouth that could command boardrooms but trembled slightly when he spoke of his fears. She thought of Eleanor's wisdom, of the grandmother who had taught her that love was a choice made daily, not a feeling that simply happened. "Can I tell you something my grandmother used to say?" Isabella asked. Adrian nodded, his attention completely focused on her. "She used to tell me that love isn't about finding someone who's already perfect. It's about finding someone whose imperfections complement your own, someone you can grow with, someone who makes you want to be the best version of yourself. And if I can't be that person, then we'll figure it out together," Isabella said firmly. "Adrian, I'm not asking you to be perfect. I'm asking you to be real." Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a crack in the armor, a glimpse of hope breaking through years of conditioning. "I don't know how to be anything but perfect, or at least how to try to be perfect." "Start by being honest," Isabella suggested. "Tell me one thing about yourself that you've never told anyone else." Adrian's eyes widened slightly at the request. Isabella could practically see him weighing the risk, calculating the potential for hurt. But then something in his face softened and he leaned forward slightly. "I still sleep with a light on," he said quietly. Isabella blinked, not expecting such a vulnerable admission. "Why?" "When I was 8, my father locked me in a closet for crying after he yelled at me for getting a B+ on a math test." Adrian's voice was steady, but Isabella could see the pain flickering in his eyes. "He said I needed to learn that weakness had consequences. I was in there for 3 hours." Isabella felt tears sting her eyes. Without thinking, she reached across the table and covered his hand with both of hers. "Adrian, I developed this fear of complete darkness after that. Even now at 37, I have to have some kind of light, a lamp, the city glow through the windows, something." He looked embarrassed. "Pretty pathetic for a grown man who runs a multi-million-dollar company." "It's not pathetic," Isabella said fiercely. "It's human. And any father who would do that to his own child—" She stopped herself, taking a deep breath. "You were just a little boy. I know that now. But knowing it and feeling it are two different things." Isabella thought of her own childhood, of Eleanor's warm arms and patient explanations, of bedtime stories and gentle corrections. The contrast made her heart ache for the boy Adrian had been. "My grandmother used to check on me every night before she went to bed," Isabella said softly, "even when I was a teenager and insisted I was too old for it. She'd crack my door open just enough to see that I was safe, and sometimes I'd pretend to be asleep just so she wouldn't stop." "That sounds wonderful," Adrian said wistfully. "It was. She made me feel safe in a way that I didn't even realize I needed until she was gone." Isabella paused, studying Adrian's face. "When did you last feel truly safe?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He was quiet for so long that Isabella wondered if he was going to answer at all. "Last night," he said finally, "when you told me I was worth more than one night. For about 30 seconds, I felt like maybe I could be enough for someone." Isabella felt her heart break and mend simultaneously. "You are enough, Adrian, more than enough. How can you be so sure? You barely know me." "I know enough," Isabella said with quiet confidence. "I know that you frequent a cafe where you let a sweet woman mother you because you crave that kind of unconditional care. I know that you drive around Brooklyn at night because you want to understand how real people live. I know that you're scared of disappointing me, which means you care more than you want to admit." Adrian stared at her, as if she'd just revealed the secrets of the universe. "You see me," he said wonderingly. "I see you," Isabella confirmed, And what I see is a man who's been taught to believe he's not worthy of love, when the truth is he's desperate for it. Is that what you think, that I'm desperate? Isabella considered the question carefully. I think you're starving, she said finally. And I think you've been starving for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to be fed. The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Adrian's grip tightened on her hands, and Isabella could see him struggling with something. Hope warring with fear, desire battling with years of careful self-protection. Isabella, he said slowly, if I let myself want this, want you, really want it, not just for one night, but for whatever comes next. Yes? Will you promise me something? Isabella's heart raced. What? If I'm not enough, if I can't be the man you deserve, will you tell me? Will you be honest with me instead of just disappearing? The request was so heartbreaking, so telling of the abandonment he'd experienced, that Isabella felt tears threaten to spill over. I promise, she said solemnly. But Adrian, you have to promise me something too. Anything. Promise me you'll try. Really try. Not to be perfect, but to be present. To let me see you, all of you, even the parts you think are broken. Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand. When he looked up, his eyes held a determination that made Isabella's breath catch. I promise, he said. But Isabella, there's something else you need to know before we go any further. What? She asked, though part of her wasn't sure she was ready for another revelation. Adrian leaned closer, his voice dropping to an intimate whisper that made her pulse race. I think I'm already falling in love with you. Some words are so powerful, they change the very air around them, making it impossible to breathe the same way ever again. Isabella's world tilted. Adrian's confession hung between them like a bridge made of starlight, beautiful, impossible, and completely unexpected. Her coffee cup rattled against its saucer as her hands began to tremble. Adrian, she whispered, her voice barely audible above the soft jazz playing from Marta's old radio. I know it's too soon, he said quickly, panic flickering across his features. I know we just met. I know this is crazy, but I can't. I've never felt anything like this before, and I couldn't sit here pretending that— Stop, Isabella said softly, reaching across to touch his lips with her fingertips. Just stop. Adrian froze under her touch, his grey eyes wide and vulnerable. Isabella could feel his breath against her fingers, could see the fear and hope warring in his expression. Around them, the cafe continued its peaceful Saturday rhythm, but their corner felt like the center of the universe. Tell me, she said gently, her hand moving to cup his cheek. Tell me what falling in love feels like for you. Adrian leaned into her touch, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them again, they were filled with wonder and terror in equal measure. It feels like drowning and learning to breathe at the same time, he said slowly. It feels like I've been walking around half alive for 37 years, and suddenly I understand what it means to be whole. Isabella's breath caught. Adrian, it feels like coming home to a place I've never been, he continued, his voice growing stronger. Like everything I've done, every mistake I've made, every wall I've built, led me to this moment, to you. Tears spilled down Isabella's cheeks before she could stop them. She thought of Eleanor's words about daily choices, about love being something you decided to do, rather than something that simply happened to you. Do you know what scares me the most? Adrian asked, his thumb brushing away her tears. What? That you're going to realize this is all too much, too fast, too complicated, and you're going to walk away before I figure out how to keep you. Isabella stared at him, this powerful man who could buy and sell companies, but was terrified of losing something he'd just found. She thought of her own fears, of being hurt again, of trusting someone who might decide she wasn't worth the effort, of hoping for something real only to discover it was another beautiful lie. But looking into Adrian's eyes, she saw something that made her want to be brave. Can I tell you a secret? She asked. Adrian nodded, his attention completely focused on her. I think I'm falling in love with you too. The words escaped before Isabella could second-guess them, and she watched as Adrian's face transformed. The careful mask he wore melted away completely, replaced by pure joy and disbelief. You are? He whispered. I am, Isabella confirmed, feeling lighter and more terrified than she'd ever been in her life. Which is absolutely insane because you're right. It's too soon, it's too fast, it's too everything, but I can't seem to stop myself. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor, and for a moment Isabella thought he was going to run. Instead, he held out his hand to her. "Come with me," he said urgently. "Where?" "Anywhere. Everywhere. I need to move. I need to—" He ran his free hand through his hair, looking gloriously disheveled. "Isabella, I feel like I might explode if I have to sit still for another second." Isabella laughed, recognizing the restless energy coursing through him because she felt it too, the need to move, to do something with the overwhelming emotion threatening to spill over. She took his hand and stood, leaving money on the table as Marta called out cheerfully from behind the counter. "You two lovebirds come back soon. And Isabella, honey, you bring him by for Sunday dinner sometime." Outside the cafe, the October air was crisp and bright, the Brooklyn streets busy with weekend foot traffic. Adrian pulled Isabella into a small park across the street, where families pushed children on swings and couples walked hand in hand along winding paths. "I don't know what to do with this feeling," Adrian said, stopping beside a bench under a maple tree blazing with autumn colors. I don't have experience with this." "With what? Love?" "With happiness," Adrian said simply. "Real happiness. The kind that makes you want to laugh and cry and shout from rooftops all at the same time." Isabella turned to face him fully, struck by the raw honesty in his voice. "What do you want to do right now, in this moment?" Adrian was quiet for a beat, his eyes roaming over her face as if memorizing every detail. "I want to kiss you," he said finally. "I want to kiss you until neither of us can remember what it felt like to be afraid." "Then kiss me," Isabella whispered. Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones with infinite tenderness. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure of this," Isabella said, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I'm sure of you." When Adrian's lips met hers, Isabella understood why poets spent lifetimes trying to capture the perfect kiss in words. It was soft and desperate, tender and passionate, full of promise and possibility. She could taste the sweetness of Marta's blueberry muffins on his lips, could feel the tremor in his hands as he held her face. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly, the words a prayer and a promise. "I know it's crazy. I know it's too soon, but I love you, Isabella Moore." "I love you too," Isabella whispered back, and felt something click into place inside her chest like a key turning in a lock she hadn't even known existed. They stood there in the little park, holding each other as if they were the only two people in the world, while autumn leaves danced around them and children's laughter filled the air. "So, what happens now?" Isabella asked eventually. "Now," Adrian said, pulling back to look at her with eyes that sparkled with newfound joy. "Now we figure out how to build something real together." "Together," Isabella repeated, loving the sound of the word. "Together," Adrian confirmed. Then his expression shifted slightly, becoming more serious. "But Isabella, there's something we need to talk about, something that could change everything." Isabella's heart skipped. "What is it?" Adrian took her hands in his grip steady but his eyes uncertain. "I need you to meet someone very important to me, someone whose opinion could make or break what we're building here. The most fragile moments in love come when you must trust someone else to see what you see." Isabella felt her stomach drop at Adrian's words. The joy from their confessions and first kiss suddenly felt precarious, like a soap bubble floating too close to thorns. "Someone important," she repeated carefully, studying his face for clues. Adrian's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "My business partner and closest friend, Lucian Ashworth. He's been with me since I started the company, and he—" Adrian paused, seeming to search for the right words. "He's very protective of me, especially when it comes to women." Isabella felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October breeze. "Protective how?" "Lucian has seen me through some difficult relationships over the years, women who were more interested in my bank account than in me." Adrian's voice grew quiet. "He's developed some strong opinions about anyone who gets close to me." "And you think he won't approve of me?" Isabella said, not really asking. "I think," Adrian said carefully, "that he'll assume you're like the others until you prove him wrong. And Lucian can be intense when he's trying to protect someone he cares about." Isabella pulled her hands free from Adrian's and took a step back, her mind racing. She thought of the women at the wedding reception, the ones with their designer gowns and practiced smiles, the ones who knew how to navigate Adrian's world with ease. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she asked. "I'm asking you to have dinner with us tomorrow night. Nothing formal, nothing intimidating, just the three of us so he can see what I see when I look at you. And if he doesn't like what he sees?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment, and that silence told Isabella everything she needed to know. "Adrian," she said slowly, "are you telling me that your friend has veto power over your relationships?" "No," Adrian said quickly. It's not that simple." "Then explain it to me. Make me understand why, after everything we just shared, you're worried about someone else's opinion." Adrian ran a hand through his hair, his earlier joy replaced by obvious stress. "Lucien saved my company 3 years ago when a deal went bad. He risked his own reputation, his own fortune, to keep me from losing everything. I owe him more than I can ever repay. That doesn't give him the right to control your personal life." "He's not trying to control me," Adrian insisted. "He's trying to protect me from making the same mistakes I've made before." Isabella felt something cold settle in her chest. "What mistakes, Adrian?" Adrian's hesitation was answer enough, but he forced himself to continue. 2 years ago, I was involved with someone, Celeste Marquette. She seemed different, genuine. For 6 months, I thought I'd found something real. What happened? I found out she was feeding information about my business deals to a competitor. She'd been planted from the beginning, paid to get close to me, to learn my strategies." Adrian's voice was flat, emotionless. "Lucien tried to warn me, but I was convinced he was wrong. I nearly lost a $60 million deal because I chose to trust her instead of listening to him." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "And you think I'm like her?" "No," Adrian said emphatically. "God, no, but Lucien doesn't know you, and given my track record—" "Your track record," Isabella repeated, anger beginning to simmer in her chest. "So what am I, Adrian? Another potential mistake that needs to be vetted by your friend?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" Isabella's voice rose slightly, drawing curious glances from passers-by. "Because from where I'm standing, it sounds like you're asking me to audition for the role of your girlfriend." Adrian stepped closer, his expression desperate. "Isabella, please. You're twisting this—" "Am I?" Isabella backed away, her heart breaking even as her anger flared. "Tell me honestly, if Lucien decides I'm not good enough, not trustworthy enough, not right for you, what happens then?" Adrian's silence was deafening. "You can't answer, can you?" Isabella said, tears stinging her eyes. "Because part of you is still that little boy locked in the closet, so desperate for approval that you'll let someone else decide whether you deserve love." "That's not fair." "Fair?" Isabella laughed bitterly. "Adrian, I'm a social worker from Brooklyn who shops at thrift stores and clips coupons. I don't know how to play games with men like your friend. I don't know how to prove that I'm not after your money, because the very fact that I have to prove it means you don't really trust me." "I do trust you." "No, you don't," Isabella said sadly. "If you trusted me, you wouldn't need someone else to validate your feelings. If you trusted what we have, you wouldn't be worried about his opinion." Adrian looked stricken. "Isabella, please don't walk away, not over this." "I'm not walking away over this," Isabella said, her voice breaking. "I'm walking away because you are. You're walking away from us before we even have a chance, hiding behind your friend's judgment instead of fighting for what you said you wanted." "That's not—" "I'm not hiding." "Then prove it," Isabella challenged. "Tell me right now that whatever Lucien thinks, whatever he says, it won't change how you feel about me. Tell me that you'll choose us over his approval." Adrian opened his mouth, then closed it again, and Isabella saw everything she needed to see in that moment of hesitation. "I thought so," she whispered. She turned to leave, but Adrian caught her arm gently. "Isabella, wait, please. Just give me a chance to show you that this can work. One dinner. That's all I'm asking." Isabella looked back at him. This man she'd fallen in love with in the span of 24 hours. This man who'd made her believe in possibilities she'd never dared dream of. She saw the fear in his eyes, the desperation, the love that was real, but not strong enough to overcome a lifetime of conditioning. "Do you know what my grandmother would have said about this?" Isabella asked quietly. Adrian shook his head. "She would have said that love shouldn't have to pass a test to be real. That if someone truly loves you, they don't ask you to prove yourself to their friends." Isabella's voice was steady now, resigned. "She would have said that the right person will choose you first, every time, without question. I am choosing you." "No, Adrian, you're asking me to choose you while you choose him." Isabella gently pulled free from his grip. "And that's not how love works." She started walking toward the park exit, her heart shattering with every step. Behind her, she heard Adrian call her name, but she didn't turn around. At the edge of the park, Isabella paused and looked back one last time. Adrian stood frozen by the bench where they'd shared their first kiss, his face a mask of anguish and indecision. "If you change your mind," she called out, her voice carrying on the autumn wind, If you decide that what we have is worth fighting for without conditions or approval from anyone else, you know where to find me." And then she walked away, leaving behind the man she loved and the future she'd glimpsed for one perfect, impossible morning. The moment that defines a man's entire life often comes disguised as an ordinary evening, when he must choose between who he's always been and who he could become. 3 days had passed since Isabella walked away from Adrian in the park, and the silence between them felt like a physical wound. Adrian sat in his Manhattan penthouse office, staring out at the city lights he'd once found comforting, feeling more alone than he had in years. His phone buzzed with yet another text from Lucian. "Dinner tonight? We need to discuss the Morrison deal." Adrian ignored it, just as he'd ignored the previous 12 messages. He couldn't face Lucian right now, couldn't pretend that business mattered when his entire world had shifted off its axis. Isabella's words echoed in his mind. "You're asking me to choose you while you choose him." The truth of it cut deeper each time he remembered it. She was right. He had been hiding behind Lucian's judgment, using his friend's protectiveness as an excuse to avoid the terrifying vulnerability of choosing love without guarantees. His assistant knocked on the door. "Mr. Schofield, Mr. Ashworth is here to see you." Before Adrian could respond, Lucian Ashworth strode into the office, his silver hair perfectly styled, his expensive suit immaculate. At 42, Lucian carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. "Avoiding me, Adrian?" Lucian settled into the leather chair across from Adrian's desk, his pale blue eyes sharp with concern. "That's not like you." "I've been busy," Adrian said, without looking up from the contract he'd been pretending to read. "Busy brooding, from what I can tell." Lucian leaned forward. "Talk to me, what's going on?" Adrian finally looked up, and Lucian's expression softened at whatever he saw in his friend's face. "It's about a woman, isn't it?" Lucian's voice was gentle but knowing. "The one from the wedding." "Isabella," Adrian said quietly, her name a prayer on his lips. "Ah." Lucian sat back, his features settling into familiar lines of concern. "And let me guess, she's not like the others. She's different, special, the one you've been waiting for your entire life." The mocking edge to Lucian's voice made Adrian's jaw tighten. "Don't. Adrian, we've been through this before. Remember Celeste? Remember how certain you were that she was different?" "Isabella is nothing like Celeste," Adrian said fiercely. "How can you be sure?" Lucian's voice was patient, like a teacher explaining basic math to a slow student. "You've known her for what, a week? A month? Adrian, you're worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Do you think it's a coincidence that these women seem to fall in love with you so quickly?" Adrian stood abruptly, his chair rolling back against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Stop talking. I'm trying to protect you." "From what? From being happy?" Adrian's voice cracked with emotion. "Lucian, I love her. Really love her. For the first time in my life, I understand what it means to want someone, not because they make me look good, or because they fit into my world, but because they make me want to be better than I am." Lucian's expression grew concerned. "Adrian, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I ever have." Adrian turned to face his friend fully. "She asked me to choose her, not over you, not over our friendship, but over my fear, and I couldn't do it." "Because you're smart enough to know." "Because I'm a coward," Adrian interrupted. "Because I've spent so long letting other people decide what I deserve that I forgot how to decide for myself." Lucian stood, his face flushing with anger. "That's not fair, Adrian. Everything I've done, every warning I've given you has been because I care about you, because I've watched you get hurt, and I'm grateful for that," Adrian said sincerely. "Lucian, you saved my company. You saved my sanity after the Celeste situation. You've been the best friend I could ask for. Then why are you talking about me like I'm the enemy?" Adrian walked to the window, pressing his palm against the cool glass. 40 floors below, the city pulsed with life, people falling in love, taking chances, building futures together. "Because Isabella was right about something," Adrian said quietly. "She said I was still that little boy locked in the closet, so desperate for approval that I'd let someone else decide whether I deserved love. That's ridiculous." "Is it?" Adrian turned back to Lucian. "When was the last time I made a major decision without asking your opinion? When was the last time I trusted my own judgment about anything that mattered?" Lucian's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. "I've been using your friendship as a shield," Adrian continued, "hiding behind your protectiveness because it's easier than risking my heart. But Isabella made me want to be brave. And where is she now?" Lucian asked, his voice sharp. If she really loved you, wouldn't she fight for you instead of giving you ultimatums? She did fight for me, Adrian said with quiet certainty. She fought for the man I could be instead of settling for the man I've always been, and I was too afraid to see it. Lucian stared at him for a long moment, and Adrian could see the moment his friend realized he was losing the argument. Adrian, please, think about what you're doing. This woman could destroy everything we've built. No, Lucian. Adrian's voice was firm but not unkind. My fear could destroy everything I have a chance to build. My fear already has. He walked to his desk and pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found Isabella's number. His thumb hovered over the call button as he looked up at Lucian. I love you like a brother, Adrian said quietly, but I'm in love with her, and if I don't fight for that, if I don't choose her without conditions or approval committees, I'll regret it for the rest of my life. Lucian's face cycled through several emotions: anger, hurt, resignation. Finally, he sighed deeply. You're really going to do this, aren't you? I'm going to try. And if she breaks your heart, if she takes you for everything you're worth? Adrian smiled, and for the first time in days it felt genuine. Then at least I'll know I was brave enough to let someone try. Lucian was quiet for a long moment, then shook his head with something that might have been admiration. You're an idiot, Adrian Schofield. Probably. Call her, Lucian said finally. But if she hurts you, I reserve the right to say, I told you so. Adrian pressed Isabella's number and held the phone to his ear, his heart hammering as it rang once, twice, 3 times. Hello? Her voice was cautious, uncertain. Isabella, Adrian breathed. Please don't hang up. Adrian? What? Why are you calling? Because I made the wrong choice, Adrian said, the words pouring out in a rush. Because I've spent the last 3 days realizing that I'd rather risk everything with you than be safe without you. There was silence on the other end of the line, and Adrian held his breath. Are you choosing me? Isabella asked quietly. I'm choosing us, Adrian said firmly. No conditions, no approval committees, no tests, just us. Another pause, then, where are you? My office. But Isabella, I can be wherever you need me to be in 15 minutes. I'm at Eleanor's grave, Isabella said softly. Mount Hebron Cemetery in Queens. I come here when I need to think. I'll be right there, Adrian said, already reaching for his keys. Adrian? Yes? Don't come because you think it's what I want to hear. Come because it's what you want to do. The line went dead, and Adrian stared at his phone for a moment before looking up at Lucian, who was watching him with a mixture of concern and respect. Well? Lucian asked. Well? Adrian said, grabbing his coat. I guess we're about to find out if love really can conquer fear. 1 year later, some love stories end where they began, but the best ones begin where they once thought they'd ended. Isabella stood in the small kitchen of the Brooklyn apartment she now shared with Adrian, flour dusting her hands as she kneaded dough for Eleanor's famous dinner rolls. Through the window, she could see the autumn leaves falling in the courtyard, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson that reminded her of that first night they'd met. The apartment was nothing like Adrian's Manhattan penthouse, cramped by most standards with creaky floors and a radiator that sang opera at 3 in the morning. But it was theirs, filled with mismatched furniture from thrift stores, Isabella's collection of well-loved books, and photographs of moments that mattered more than money ever could. Something smells incredible, Adrian's voice came from behind her, followed by warm arms wrapping around her waist. Isabella leaned back against his chest, marveling as she still did every day at how perfectly they fit together. Eleanor's dinner rolls. I thought we should have something special for tonight. Everything's special when it's with you, Adrian murmured against her neck, making her shiver in the best possible way. Charmer, Isabella laughed, but she turned in his arms to face him. He looked different than he had that night at the wedding, softer somehow, more at peace. His expensive suits had been replaced by jeans and sweaters. His perfectly styled hair now bore the marks of her fingers, and his eyes held a lightness that spoke of a man who had finally learned to trust in his own worth. How was your day? Isabella asked, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. Good. The youth center project is moving forward faster than expected. We should be able to break ground next month. Adrian's smile was genuine, proud in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins or quarterly reports. 6 months ago, Adrian had made a decision that shocked everyone who knew him. He'd stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his hotel empire to focus on something that mattered to him more, building community centers in underserved neighborhoods. It was Isabella's work with troubled teenagers that had inspired him, but the passion was entirely his own. "And Lucian?" Isabella asked gently. "Still thinks I've lost my mind," Adrian said with a chuckle. "But he's coming around, slowly. He actually asked about you today." Isabella raised an eyebrow. "Really? He wanted to know if you taught me how to make those chocolate chip cookies I brought to the office last week. And what did you tell him? That you'd taught me a lot of things, but the most important one was how to choose happiness over fear." Isabella felt her heart swell with love for this man who had learned to rebuild himself from the ground up. Their path hadn't been easy. There had been arguments, misunderstandings, moments when old patterns threatened to resurface. But they had kept their promise to each other, choosing love daily, working through their fears together instead of running from them separately. "Speaking of choosing," Adrian said, his voice suddenly nervous, "there's something I need to tell you." Isabella's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Adrian stepped back and reached into his pocket, pulling out a small velvet box that made Isabella's breath catch in her throat. "Isabella Moore," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "you once told me that love isn't about finding someone who's already perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections complement your own." Isabella's eyes filled with tears as Adrian dropped to one knee in their tiny kitchen, surrounded by the smell of baking bread and the golden light of late afternoon. "You taught me that I'm worthy of love, not because of what I achieve, but because of who I am. You showed me that forever isn't a promise you make once, it's a choice you make every single day." Adrian opened the box, revealing a simple but stunning diamond ring that caught the light like captured starlight. "So I'm asking you to make that choice with me every day for the rest of our lives." "Adrian," Isabella whispered, her heart so full she thought it might burst. "Marry me, Isabella. Not because it makes sense on paper or because anyone else thinks we should, but because I love you with everything I am and everything I hope to become." Isabella looked down at this man who had learned to be brave for love, who had chosen her over his fears, who had built a new life, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. She thought of Eleanor, of the grandmother who had taught her that real love was a daily choice, and she knew with absolute certainty what that choice was. "Yes," Isabella said, her voice strong and clear despite her tears. "Yes, Adrian, 1,000 times yes." As Adrian slipped the ring onto her finger and stood to kiss her, Isabella felt Eleanor's presence as clearly as if her grandmother were standing right there in the kitchen with them. She could almost hear that warm, honey-thick voice saying, "Now that's what real love looks like, baby girl. That's worth waiting for." The timer on the oven chimed, signaling that the dinner rolls were ready, and they broke apart laughing. "Perfect timing," Adrian said, wiping tears from Isabella's cheeks. "Eleanor always did know how to make an entrance," Isabella replied, admiring the ring on her finger. "She would have loved you, you know. Once she got past wanting to hit you with her wooden spoon for that one-night comment." "I would have deserved it," Adrian said solemnly, "but I would have won her over eventually." "How can you be so sure?" Adrian cupped her face in his hands, his grey eyes serious and full of love. "Because I would have told her the truth, that her granddaughter saved my life in every way a person can be saved, and that I plan to spend every day showing her how grateful I am." Isabella kissed him then, pouring all her love into the gesture, tasting salt from happy tears and the promise of forever on his lips. Later that evening, as they sat on their fire escape sharing Eleanor's dinner rolls and watching the city lights twinkle below them, Isabella reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From that first dance in a Manhattan ballroom to this moment on a Brooklyn fire escape, they had learned that love wasn't about perfect circumstances or easy choices. It was about two imperfect people deciding to be brave together. "What are you thinking about?" Adrian asked, following her gaze out over the city. "Just this. Us. How we almost didn't happen because we were both so afraid." "But we did happen," Adrian said, squeezing her hand. "And we're going to keep happening every day for the rest of our lives." Isabella smiled, thinking of Eleanor's words about daily choices and promises kept. "Every day," she agreed. And as the stars appeared one by one over Brooklyn, Isabella Moore and Adrian Schofield sat together, planning a future built not on fear or conditions or other people's approval, but on the simple revolutionary act of choosing love every single day. The end final message to viewers. Have you ever been brave enough to choose love over fear? To fight for someone who saw your worth when you couldn't see it yourself? Isabella and Adrian's story reminds us that real love isn't about perfect timing or easy circumstances. It's about two people deciding to be vulnerable, to grow, and to choose each other daily. What would you have done in Isabella's place? Would you have given Adrian that second chance or walked away for good? Your participation in the channel is very important. Please leave your opinion in the comments. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.